I'll be going over the torso model and everything you need to know for the final practical exam. So the first salivary gland, which we can see here, lies on the outside of the cheek, and this is the parotid gland. Parotid gland, that's P-A-R-O-T-I-D, parotid gland. Now, if I look at the other side, there's a little salivary gland here called the submandibular gland. And that should make sense because this is the mandible and it lies under the mandible. We have a third salivary gland, which is not visible in this model, and that's the sublingual gland. That's the third and final salivary gland that we have. So moving down the surface of our model a little bit here, here we see the hyoid bone. All right, the hyoid bone is the only unarticulated bone in the body, the hyoid bone. From here to here would be the larynx, the larynx. Now the larynx is where we have the vocal cords. Now what we're seeing here in blue is actually called the thyroid cartilage of the larynx. Thyroid cartilage of the larynx. Okay, and the larynx is from here to here behind these muscles. Inferior to the larynx, once I get to here, I see these ridges, or rings I should say rather. These are the cartilaginous rings of the trachea. Okay, the cartilaginous rings of the trachea. And right here, I see the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland right here. Yeah. So let's start pulling some stuff out here so we can get a better view at the internal organs. And so let's take this breastplate off here and let's identify these organs. So here I see the top portion of the esophagus. The esophagus. So the pharynx is the throat, and the pharynx is going to connect to the esophagus and to the trachea. It's going to bifurcate. This is why we can choke on stuff, right? If I were to open this up, this is actually the glottis, where the vocal cords are. Right here, we have the epiglottis. The epiglottis, when we swallow, this epiglottis is going to fold down and cover the airways so that we don't choke on our food. This is the glottis, which has the vocal cords. Once I get to here, where these rings are, that's where I get to the trachea, the trachea. So this entire region is the larynx. This portion here is the thyroid cartilage of the larynx. And back here is the cricoid cartilage of the larynx. So I should note, this is the trachea, this is the larynx. Well, what about this part? This is actually part of the esophagus that you're seeing here. So in front we have the trachea, and behind we've got the esophagus. I'm just going to go over all the organs real quick, and then we're going to get more detailed. All right, so most notably, we have the heart. Okay, and remember, left and right are switched. It's mirror image. It's the right and left of the model or of the patient. So this is the right lung and the left lung. This is the diaphragm. This is the principal muscle for respiration, the diaphragm. This is the liver, the stomach. All this in gray is the colon, and all this in yellow is the small intestine. So now that we have an overview, let's zoom in a little bit and get some more detail. Okay, so now we have a much better view. This is the esophagus. This is the trachea. This is the heart. Okay, this is the aorta. This is the superior vena cava right here. This is the pulmonary trunk. Okay. And the superior vena cava is actually formed by the right brachiocephalic vein and left brachiocephalic vein merging together. So right and left brachiocephalic veins. Brachio means arm. Cephalic means head. So that means blood coming from the head, neck, and right arm is going to come through the right brachiocephalic vein. Similarly, blood from the left side of the head and neck and the left arm is going to go through the left brachiocephalic vein. The left and right brachiocephalic veins are going to merge together to form the superior vena cava, which leads to the right atrium, which is the main entrance to the heart. Right? Because the heart is a little bit off-center towards the left side, this means that the lungs are very different from one another. If you do have to have a lung injury, you want to hope that it's in the smaller lung, which is on the left side. Right? So the left lung is smaller, and it has only two lobes. It has the superior lobe and the inferior lobe. So superior lobe and inferior lobe of the left lung. Now what about the right lung? The right lung is considerably larger, and it has three lobes instead of two. This is the superior lobe of the right lung, the middle lobe of the right lung, and you can only see a portion of it until I take it out. This is the inferior lobe of the right lung. But now that I've taken it out, you can really see the difference. Okay, the superior lobe of the right lung, middle lobe of the right lung, and inferior lobe of the right lung. So superior vena cava, I can see more of that here. I can see the ascending aorta here and the pulmonary trunk here. So that's a much better view. All right, so I'm going to take the heart off. Now, as you might recall, the aorta has branches. So this is the ascending aorta, and then once I start getting to these branches, that's the aortic arch. And a lot of it is kind of obscured with this model. But I can ask you for the ascending aorta and for the thoracic aorta. So after the aortic arch, the aorta is going to turn and descend. At that portion, the whole thing is technically called the descending aorta, but I'd like you to be more specific. The portion of the descending aorta that is in the thoracic cavity is named the thoracic aorta, and that's here in red. Once it passes through the diaphragm, the thoracic aorta at that point becomes the abdominal aorta. So here we see the trachea, all right, which is part of the respiratory system. Now, the trachea, I can see a little bit of it right here, but right here it's going to bifurcate or split. And I don't see a whole lot because on that side, because it's actually stuck on the back of this, which I won't ask you for it there. So, but this bifurcation, the trachea is going to split right here into the right and left primary bronchi. So these are the primary bronchi. Okay. So bronchi is plural, so if I just point here, you should answer the left primary bronchus. So US instead of I. So bronchi and bronchus. This is that thoracic aorta, and this is the esophagus. Okay, so the esophagus is going to continue to descend, and it's also going to go through the diaphragm, which is here. All right, so the aorta and the esophagus are going to go through the diaphragm. Remember, diaphragm is the principal muscle of respiration or breathing. I'm going to remove the diaphragm, so just so you know, that's what the diaphragm looks like. Should it come up on the practical exam by itself. Here I see the liver. This is the inferior vena cava. I've got the inferior vena cava is here, and it's also here. So, but this is the inferior vena cava that's coming from the liver. Now let's go ahead and remove the liver. So this is the liver. Right, this is somewhat how it's placed in the body. This is the inferior vena cava. This is the right lobe, and this is the left lobe. All right, I'm going to turn this around so we can see some additional structures. All right, so here's another view of the inferior vena cava. Now in green here, this structure is the gallbladder. The gallbladder. Now, in the digestive system, the function of the liver is to make bile. Bile functions to break down fat. What the gallbladder does is it takes the bile from the liver and it stores it and concentrates it. And it waits for a signal that really greasy pizza is on the way. Okay, so when it notices a high-fat meal is on the way to the stomach, that's when the gallbladder is going to secrete its specialized, extra concentrated bile that it has sitting around. We do have bile released from the gallbladder as well as the liver, but the gallbladder kind of is that specialty for high-fat content meals. Bile travels from the gallbladder through the cystic duct. That's S-Y-S-T-I-C, cystic duct. And bile from the liver is going to go through the common hepatic duct. Okay, here in green. Now, the common hepatic duct and the cystic duct are going to combine and merge together right here at this point to form the common bile duct. Now the common bile duct is going to continue and it's going to go to the pancreas. From there it gets mixed with pancreatic juices, which has tons of enzymes, and then it goes to the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine where most of the digestion actually occurs. There's two other things you might notice here. This is the proper hepatic artery, and this is the portal vein, or hepatic vein, or hepatic portal vein. Okay, all of those will work for me. All right, so here is the stomach. Here's part of the diaphragm. Here's part of the diaphragm. Here's the esophagus. Here's a continuation of the esophagus. And the esophagus is going to empty food into the stomach. Well, right here, there's a valve. So I could point to it here or here. Okay, that valve. This is the entranceway to the stomach, and it's called the cardiac valve or cardiac sphincter. Why does it have such a strange name? Well, if I put all this back together, now once you see them together, it's like, okay, I'll buy it. That's why they call it the cardiac valve or cardiac sphincter. Either is fine. So cardiac valve or cardiac sphincter. The exit to the stomach, and that's the pyloric valve or pyloric sphincter. And I could ask for it here or here. So let me point out just a couple of things before I get too much further. This whole structure here is the pancreas. The pancreas. And here we see that common bile duct. All right, so that's that bile coming from the liver and gallbladder. It's going to go to the pancreas after that. After the pancreas, it's going to go to this first part of the small intestine right here, which is the duodenum. We'll get a better view of that in just a moment. Here, we can see part of the right kidney. Okay, so this is the right kidney here. And this is just a portion of the left kidney in this model. This right here is the spleen. The spleen. So on the outside, I could point here for the pyloric valve or pyloric sphincter, cardiac valve or cardiac sphincter. When I open this up, this is the cardiac valve or cardiac sphincter and the pyloric valve or pyloric sphincter. How are you going to be able to tell which is which? What you want to do is you want to look for this bulge. See this bulge here? This bulge is called the fundus. F-U-N-D-U-S. Also sometimes called the fundic region, but on your answer key it just says fundus, and that's what it says. Fundic region would be the same thing. The main portion of this is actually the body of the stomach. The portion by the cardiac sphincter is the cardiac region. The region by the pyloric sphincter is the pyloric region. The main region is going to be the body of the stomach again. Now, if I point to the body of the stomach, but I ask about the ridges are called rugae, which is R-U-G-A-E, the rugae. The rugae allows for expansion of the stomach after a large meal. Next, let's go over the small intestine. The small intestine includes all of this, as well as this first portion of the small intestine here. The first portion of the small intestine is called the duodenum, and that goes from here to here. So the first place that food goes after the stomach is the duodenum. The duodenum, interestingly enough, is where most of the digestion, when we say digestion, we mean the breakdown of food. So not the absorption, but the breakdown of food, actual digestion, going to occur mostly here in the duodenum. And the reason for that is I've got bile going here, I've got pancreatic juices that are going there, so tons of enzymes and bile are working in this first portion of the small intestine to break down the food further. After the first portion of the small intestine, there's no real separation between the last two segments of the small intestine. So the first segment is the duodenum, and the second portion is the jejunum. Now the jejunum is going to be a little bit up here, and most of this here. Okay. So now I'm going to make it really obvious, and I'm going to point way over here if I'm asking for the jejunum of the small intestine. Now, the exit to the small intestine is going to be here. All right, that's going to be where it exits. So all around here is going to be the ileum, the I-L-E-U-M, ileum of the small intestine. All right, so the jejunum and the ileum. The jejunum is where most of the absorption of nutrients occurs. So that's when really you're absorbing nutrients from the food. It's passing through the walls of the small intestine and getting absorbed into the bloodstream for distribution. After the small intestine, we get to the colon. And in between, there's another valve, and this valve is right here. The first portion of the colon, aka large intestine, this first portion is called the cecum of the large intestine or colon. That's C-E-C-U-M, the cecum. This valve here is called the ileocecal valve. The ileocecal valve. All right, so this portion is the cecum. Okay, after the cecum, we get to the ascending colon. The ascending colon. Once I get about here, at this point, I'm close to the liver. They actually call this bend the hepatic flexure because of this bend, the hepatic flexure. And this portion here is the transverse colon, the transverse colon. So transverse colon until about here. At this point, the colon's going to turn and descend to form the descending colon. The descending colon. So this is all descending colon back here. And right here, I'm just getting to the next portion of the large intestine, which is continued here. At this point, see how it kind of makes this weird S shape here? This portion is called the sigmoid colon. Sigmoid colon, because it looks like an S or a sigma. Sometimes they'll do a full colonoscopy. Other times they may just do a sigmoidoscopy. Sigmoidoscopy is just going to go through this bend here. Okay. A full colonoscopy is going to look at all of the colon. So this is the sigmoid colon. Now at this point, we see that it turns and goes straight down. This last portion of the colon is the rectum. The rectum. Now the rectum is going to end at the anal sphincter and at that point release feces. All right, so let's go over some of these other structures, make sure that we know them well. All right, cardiac valve, the right kidney, left kidney, the spleen, pancreas, the pyloric valve, the duodenum. This structure here is the bladder. This is the bladder. The kidneys function to form the urine. The urine is formed in the kidneys, and then it's going to travel through these white structures here called the ureters. The ureters. So this would be the right ureter and the left ureter. Both right and left ureters are going to drain into the bladder to store urine until it's ready to be released through the urethra. And that's everything you need to know for this model. Any questions? One of the first things you'll realize when it comes to the brain, we have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. We have hills and valleys, which are on the outer portion here. The hills are called gyri. If I'm talking about just one hill, it would be gyrus. If I'm talking about more than one hill, it would be gyri. And then we also have these indentations, or these little grooves. These grooves are called sulci. Just think of if you're sulking, you're down, so that's a groove. Singular would be sulcus, plural would be sulci. All right, so we've got these grooves here. We have 3 main portions to the brain. The largest portion includes this entire portion here. This is called the cerebrum. The cerebrum. This here is the cerebellum, which actually translates to little brain, interestingly enough. This whole thing is considered the brainstem, but the brainstem has 3 separate parts that I want you to know. So let's just go through that since I'm pointing at it. The brainstem includes the midbrain, which is going to be the structures here. Where I have this bump, this portion of the brainstem is called the pons. The pons. Inferior to the pons is the medulla or medulla oblongata. All right, so the pons and the medulla oblongata. We also have what are called fissures in the brain. So we have the grooves, but we have some really deep grooves, for example, here. So this is called the great longitudinal fissure. The great longitudinal fissure. Now, the great longitudinal fissure is what is going to separate the left hemisphere from the right hemisphere. If we go to the side, then we see another deep groove here. This is called the lateral fissure or Sylvian fissure. Lateral or Sylvian fissure. From this view, I just want to point out 2 portions of the brainstem in this view. So this portion here is the pons, from here to here. Below the pons is the medulla or medulla oblongata. Let's look at some of these outer structures and lobes before we peel this guy apart. Right here, this is actually called the central sulcus. The central sulcus. And it's at number 5 with a little arrow. Central sulcus. The central sulcus is going to separate the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. In this model, from here all the way forward would be the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe. Interestingly, this model puts it here for the number. So if you look at this number, it says frontal lobe, but it's actually all of this. So I could point anywhere here for frontal lobe. In the frontal lobe, this is really our higher level thinking, being able to plan things out in your mind, being able to see the consequences of one's actions, higher intelligence. For the parietal lobe, it actually has it labeled on the model here as number 2, but the parietal lobe is going to be from the central sulcus all the way back to about yay. The parietal lobe, this is your internal GPS or coordinate system. It also has your sensations are here. This is that central sulcus at number 5, the central sulcus. Now, I have a gyrus at 6 and one at 7. 6 is the precentral, because it's coming before the central sulcus. Okay, the precentral gyrus and the postcentral gyrus. The precentral gyrus is the primary motor cortex. The primary motor cortex is here. At number 7, which is part of the parietal lobe, you might remember, this is the postcentral sulcus, also known as the primary somatosensory cortex. Primary somatosensory cortex. On the side, where it says number 4, this is the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe. This does some memory processing and auditory processing. Now in the back, here it says 3, and that is indicating the occipital lobe, but the occipital lobe is actually going to be from here to here. Okay. So the occipital lobe processes visual information and is located in the back of the brain. So you do have eyes in the back of your head. A couple structures you need to know about the base of the brain. Roman numeral 1 is cranial nerve 1. That is the olfactory nerve. Think about an olfactory that smells. This is your sense of smell or olfaction. So the olfactory nerve is cranial nerve 1. Here at number 8 is the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb. I also want you to know cranial nerve 2. Cranial nerve 2 is the optic nerve. The optic nerve. So the optic nerve is actually going to start in the eye. The optic nerve then intact leaves each eye and then is going to come here to the brain. So the optic nerve is cranial nerve number 2. At this point, I have visual information that's going to travel and cross to the other side of the brain. This is the optic chiasm. The optic chiasm. Oh, bummer. I just realized I don't have a pituitary gland. There's a big bean-like structure that would normally be right here. I'll put up like a picture of it so you guys can see one that has it on there. But there's a pituitary gland that sits here at the base of the brain, and the pituitary gland is going to secrete human growth hormone. It's important for growth and development. These right here, these little things that look like boobs, because these are the mammillary bodies. The mammillary bodies. I don't know if that's actually why they called them that, but yeah, mammillary bodies. Then of course the pons and medulla oblongata, and that's all you're responsible for that. The rest of the structures you need to know are inside. In this outer view, this is actually the cerebrum here, the cerebrum. Okay, this is the cerebellum here, the cerebellum. Now I have these white structures here. These are the arbor vitae of the cerebellum. The arbor vitae of the cerebellum. Okay. I think first let's go over the ventricles. If I point here and I ask for the ventricles specifically, then I'm looking for the lateral ventricles, because I have the lateral ventricles. I have one on the right, one on the left, and they lie right here. If I point here and I don't ask for the ventricles and I ask for the structure, this is actually the septum pellucidum. Okay, the septum pellucidum. And the septum pellucidum is going to separate the right and left lateral ventricles from one another. All right, so the lateral ventricles separated by the septum pellucidum lie here. Okay, right here, this is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. The choroid plexus of the third ventricle. And then the rest of the third ventricle is seen here at number 20. The fourth ventricle is down here at E. Okay, this would be the fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle. And that's at the base of the cerebellum. And at 34, we have a little arrow, but what 34 is actually supposed to be indicating, according to the key for this model, this is a cerebral aqueduct. Now, the cerebral aqueduct connects the fourth ventricle to the third ventricle. Okay, so the aqueduct is actually this whole thing here, cerebral aqueduct. All right, so let's go over some structures here. Here at 32, this is the tegmentum of the midbrain. Tegmentum of the midbrain. This bump right here is the pons. This is the medulla oblongata, or just simply medulla. This is the tectal plate. However, because of the function, I'd rather you know this as two different names. The superior portion of this is called the superior colliculus. And the superior colliculus is going to orient the eyes and head toward any bright flash of light, any sudden motion, an unexpected shadow appearing in your peripheral vision, anything that could mean danger. Your superior colliculus is going to automatically, before you even have time to think or process, it's going to orient your head and eyes toward any possible danger, which is really interesting. Similarly, the bottom portion of this tectal plate is called the inferior colliculus. And the inferior colliculus is going to orient your head and eyes towards any startling sound. So nice survival reflex mechanisms here. This is a mammillary body right here at number 24. The pineal gland or pineal gland at number 23, what this does is this is going to secrete melatonin based on the light and dark patterns that you're seeing. This is your sleep-wake cycle is governed by this small little pineal gland. Next to the pineal or pineal gland, I have the posterior commissure. Commissure just simply means connection. Here at G, that's the anterior commissure. And that's another connection between the right and left hemispheres. The main connection between the right and left hemispheres, though, is going to occur here. And this is the corpus callosum. So this whole structure here is the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. Now, at the base of the lateral ventricles with the septum pellucidum separating them, I've got at number 12 the fornix. Fornix, the fornix. At number 19, I have the thalamus, and at 21, the hypothalamus. So the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And what connects the two is here at number 22. This is the interthalamic adhesion. Interthalamic adhesion. Oh, yeah, and then there would be a pituitary gland right here. Sorry, no pituitary gland. All right. Questions, comments, or panic attacks? All right, welcome to your heart. So first off, let me just go over the 4 chambers of the heart. Okay, we have the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. In between the right atrium and right ventricle, I have the tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve. Here I've got the pulmonary valve or pulmonary semilunar valve. And the valves we see on this side, I see the bicuspid valve, also known as the mitral valve. And if I move this enough, way back there, you see that underneath? It's labeled 45. That is the aortic valve, or the aortic semilunar valve that's hiding back there. So let's talk about the flow of blood through the heart. Deoxygenated blood coming from the lower portions of the body are going to return to the heart at the right atrium through the inferior vena cava, which is down here, the inferior vena cava. We have the right brachiocephalic vein. This takes blood from the right side of the head and neck and the right arm. At 18, this is the left brachiocephalic vein, taking blood from the left side of the head and neck and the left arm. The right and left brachiocephalic veins merge together at 16 to form the superior vena cava. The superior vena cava. Both the superior and inferior vena cava, or cavae, are going to drain here into the right atrium. All right, so I'm going to open this up. This is the right auricle here at number 2. So let's open up the right atrium. So this has deoxygenated blood coming from the top portions and bottom portions of the body. From here, blood is going to pass through the tricuspid valve and enter into the right ventricle. This is the tricuspid valve. The strings here are the chordae tendineae, which are attached to the papillary muscles, and that acts to create tension on the valve to make sure it opens correctly and only in one direction. The heart is going to contract. When it contracts, it's going to push this valve closed. It's going to snap shut. It's going to snap shut here, and this valve is going to open. This is the pulmonary semilunar valve. So blood at this point is going to go through the pulmonary semilunar valve and enter into the pulmonary trunk here, the pulmonary trunk. Now, the pulmonary trunk is going to bifurcate or split into the right and left pulmonary arteries. Now, these are all arteries. The pulmonary trunk is an artery. The right and left pulmonary arteries are arteries, but it's blue because this is actually carrying deoxygenated blood. But remember, the definition of an artery is it's going away from the heart. So these are all arteries despite them being colored blue. All right, so pulmonary trunk. Then I have the right pulmonary artery going to the right lung, left pulmonary artery going to the left lung. The arteries are going to continue to get smaller and smaller and smaller until we get to the level of the capillaries. Now, capillaries are so small, they only allow one single blood cell through at a time. The walls of the capillaries are only 1 centimeter thick. What this allows to happen is gas exchange. Okay, so deoxygenated blood is carrying carbon dioxide as a waste product from all of the cells of the body. So when it gets towards the lungs, it's going to go into capillary beds that surround these tiny structures in the lungs called the alveoli. And the alveoli are going to pick up the carbon dioxide from the blood cells and deliver oxygen to the red blood cells. Okay, so that's the whole reason that we're inhaling and exhaling. So now we're at the level of the lungs. At this point, blood is now oxygenated, but now those veins that are oxygenated are going to carry blood back to the heart, because remember, a vein is anything going toward the heart. The way we get back to the heart is I actually have a pair, about 2 each here. So this is on, let's see, just for your orientation, this is the right side. Both of these are the right pulmonary veins. Right pulmonary veins. They're oxygenated because the red blood cells here have just come from the lungs and they're fully oxygenated. And then here are the left pulmonary veins. And they're veins because they're going toward the heart, but they're red in the pulmonary circuit because they're carrying oxygenated blood. Both the right pulmonary veins and left pulmonary veins are going to drain into the left atrium. From here, blood's going to travel through the bicuspid valve, also known as the mitral valve. Mitral valve, again, is going to function because it's attached to the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles, which ensure this opens in one direction only. So from this point, blood is going to travel through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. At this point, the left ventricle is going to contract. Let's see if I can give us a good view here. The left ventricle is going to contract, and here at number 45, blood's going to travel through the aortic semilunar valve and then enter the aorta. For the aorta, the first branches off of the ascending aorta, which includes all of this, I can see one of the branches like actually coming straight from the aorta. The other one's kind of hiding behind the pulmonary trunk. But the first branches that I have coming off of the ascending aorta are actually the right and left coronary arteries. The right and left coronary arteries. The coronary arteries supply the heart itself with blood, because just like everything else in the body, the heart needs blood too. Here at 31, this entire structure here is the right coronary artery. The right coronary artery. Now, the left coronary artery is a little more interesting. And here we see just one of the examples of the asymmetry we get with the circulatory system and the heart. Here is the left coronary artery. The left coronary artery is going to bifurcate or split. One branch is going to travel straight here, and this is the anterior interventricular artery. Anterior interventricular artery. The other branch is going to circle around. This is the circumflex artery. The circumflex artery. Once we get to this kind of big bulbous area here, all right, I don't know what happened there, but now it's working. Okay, the coronary sinus. So here is the coronary sinus. Okay. And this is a better view of that inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava. If you're wondering what this is actually the descending aorta, or thoracic aorta would be completely correct as well. This is the esophagus. And at 21, this is the back of the trachea. And these are the cartilaginous rings of the trachea. So just kind of bringing this all together here just so you have a more global view. Okay. And then, of course, the trachea is going to bifurcate into the right and left, because it's the back of the heart, so it's switched. So the right primary bronchus and the left primary bronchus. If you're wondering what this is actually a continuation of this right here at A. So this is the right pulmonary artery, and that's a continuation of the right pulmonary artery. Okay, a few other things to know. So this is the aorta. And the aorta includes the ascending aorta. And then once I have these branches, this is the aortic arch. Now, this is called the ligamentum arteriosum. This is actually an artifact from fetal circulation. Now, a baby in the womb does not breathe oxygen. Okay, so there's no reason for a fetus to have circulation go to the lungs. Does that make sense? The mother does all the oxygenation of the blood for the fetus. So for that reason, now remember, we've got the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit, right? Well, what this does is this allows the fetal circulation to bypass the pulmonary circuit completely. And then that completely changes, of course, after the baby's born. Isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we actually, even in adulthood, we have an artifact here from the fact that this used to do a bridge. And off of the aortic arch, we have 3 blood vessels, 3 branches. The first branch is the brachiocephalic trunk. The brachiocephalic trunk, sometimes called the brachiocephalic artery, not to be confused with the brachiocephalic veins here, right? So the brachiocephalic trunk. And the reason it's called the trunk is it's going to bifurcate and it's going to separate into the right common carotid artery and the right subclavian artery. Now here at number 14, this is the left common carotid artery. This is going to bring oxygenated blood to the head and neck. At 15, we have this left subclavian artery. The left subclavian artery is going to feed oxygenated blood to the left arm. And the reason it's called subclavian is it actually kind of goes from the heart and then goes up and kind of arches right below the clavicles. So it's called subclavian arteries for that reason.